Good evening. Thanks for joining us on India Business Hour. I'm Shereen Bhan. The headlines we're tracking for you tonight. The government expects FY23 GDP growth to slow to 7% in its first advance estimate. This is slightly higher than the CNBC-TV18 estimate of 6.9%. It also expects a nominal GDP growth rate of 15.4%. The Sensex and the Nifty dropped more than 1% in the first week of 2023. It's the worst start to a new year in the last 6 years. Stocks have ended the fourth straight week with losses. The government is considering another one-time dispute resolution scheme to reduce tax litigation. Tax departments are studying possible contours to expedite more than 33,000 customs cases worth over 38,000 crore rupees. The scheme could be announced in the upcoming budget. That's an exclusive.
During the first 3 quarters of 2022, food price inflation in South Asia averaged more than 20%, and that's pretty high. The region's heavy dependence on imported fossil fuels has made it vulnerable to imported fuel inflation.
Taming inflation should be a policy priority for the South Asian region, says RBI Governor Shaktikanta Das. Warns that risk to growth and inflation outlook may rise if inflation persists at high levels. The Reserve Bank has hiked rates by 225 basis points in the last 8 months. Lenders hang up Vodafone Idea's emergency call for additional loans. Seek clarity on the government's equity conversion before considering further loans. This leaves the telco in a catch-22. The centre has asked the telecom company to infuse more funds before taking a call on equity conversion. The Air India passenger accused of urinating on another passenger loses his job as the Vice President of Wells Fargo in India. Aviation regulator, the DGCA, issues an advisory to all airlines on handling unruly passengers. Air India's CEO tells employees to report all incidents of improper behaviour. Just days after Amazon announced 18,000 job cuts, sources say Amazon India will lay off 1% of its workforce. This is likely to impact nearly 1,000 Amazon employees working in India. The National Disaster Response Force gets dispatched to Uttarakhand's Joshimath after cracks appear in nearly 600 residences, impacting 3,000 families. Locals blame an NTPC tunnel and other construction project. NTPC tells CNBC-TV18 the hydroelectric project is not responsible and a tunnel being constructed does not pass through Joshimath at all. Also on the show, a flying car, a portable electric scooter and a robot dog. We bring you the latest gadgets and gizmos from the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. Well, let's go straight to the top story this evening. The government expects GDP growth to slow to 7% in FY23. Now, the first advance estimate for growth this year has been released, and this number is significant because it forms the base for the government's budget projections for the next financial year. So from a growth rate of 8.7% last year, growth is likely to slow to 7%. But this is on expected lines and slightly higher than the CNBC-TV18 poll estimate of 6.9%. Lata's here with more on the GDP data. Lata, no surprises.
Well, the 7% GDP growth assumption estimate for the current year is not surprising anyone. The CNBC-TV18 poll itself was 6.9. As far as the components are concerned, the growth in manufacturing has been assumed at about 1.6%. Our poll had thrown up a much more modest number of about 0.5% or thereabouts. So that perhaps is an overestimation. Otherwise, most of the estimates in terms of trade, hotels, communication and services, which is a very large sector, coming in at about 13.7, is on expected lines because that sector was hurt over the last 2 years. So a strong growth of 13.5% is par for the course. The assumption of private final consumption expenditure rising by 7.7% also is perhaps an underestimation. It may be even higher according to the estimates. So the NSO's estimates for the current year is not surprising anyone. The more important number which we should take home is the nominal GDP growth. Nominal GDP growth has been estimated at 15.4. Our poll was expecting a 15.8% growth in nominal GDP because this year inflation has been high. Nominal GDP is real GDP plus inflation. And since inflation is high, economists were expecting a 15.8, 16% growth. So the NSO is telling us that this year, in nominal terms, without adjusting for inflation, the nominal GDP will be 273 trillion rupees. The number becomes important because based on this, the government will have an assumption for next year's GDP in the budget. economists say that assumption should be at best 300 trillion, a 10% jump over this 273 trillion. If that comes in as expectations, the market will be happy with the budget. If the assumption is anything higher, there will be a little bit of skepticism. It also means that a maximum fiscal deficit next year can be about 17.5 lakh crore, which would be about 5.8, 5.9% of this GDP. Those are the important takeaways from this NSO first estimates of the current year's GDP.
This implies is that the growth in the last half of the year will not be very much higher than 4.5%, a little bit higher than that, right? But as far as 15.4% is concerned, I think the NSO is expecting inflation to come down faster than even possibly the RBI has. So I think there's a little bit of optimism built into that.
Well, that's the big macro data of the day. On to the markets now. Let's shift focus to the Lal Street, where stocks have marked their worst start to a new year in the last 6 years. The Sensex fell below the 60,000 mark after losing nearly 2% this week. The Nifty is down over 1% as both major indices ended in the red for the fourth week. Now, metals, banks, IT stocks were the worst performers. In the US, crucial jobs data says that things are moving. In fact, the employment market remains strong, with more than 2.3 lakh jobs being added in the month of December. This is above expectations. The unemployment rate stands at 3.5% compared to the estimates of 3.7%. So the resilience in the labor market continues there as far as the US is concerned. Meanwhile, inflation in the Eurozone dropped for the second consecutive month in December on the back of low energy prices. Headline inflation coming in at an annual rate of 9.2%, down from over 10% in November. This according to data from the European Statistics Agency, Eurostat. Despite this, Eurozone's inflation rate represents almost 5 times the 2% target set by the ECB. And speaking of inflation, it continues to concern the Reserve Bank. Speaking at an IMF event today, the RBI governor said taming inflation should be a policy priority for the South Asian region. In fact, the governor also warned the risk to growth in inflation outlook may rise if we continue to see inflation at elevated levels.
The first policy priority for the South Asian region is obviously taming inflation. Multiple external shocks in the form of COVID-related global supply chain disruptions, food and energy crisis following the war in Ukraine, and financial market volatility arising from the aggressive monetary policy tightening have exerted sustained price pressures in the South Asian economies, which is of course felt in other parts of the world also. For successful disinflation, credible monetary policy actions accompanied by targeted supply-side interventions, fiscal, trade policy and administrative measures have become the key instruments.
Well, that's the RBI governor. Less than a month to go for the union budget. The government is considering another one-time resolution scheme to reduce tax litigation. Sources say tax departments are studying possible contours to expedite more than 33,000 customs cases worth over 38,000 crore rupees. The government has collected more than 90,000 crore rupees from dispute resolution schemes that were announced in previous budgets in 2019 and 2020. Timsy standing by with the details. Timsy, what stage is this proposal at, and can we expect it to be introduced in the upcoming budget?
Well, sources are indicating that the government is considering to introduce a new one-time dispute resolution scheme to reduce litigation. Revenue Department is currently contemplating such a scheme for both direct and indirect taxes disputes, and if approved, the schemes could be part of the budget announcement. According to sources, the idea is based on the past success of dispute resolution schemes which were announced in the past, which were SVLDRS for indirect taxes and Vivad Se Vishwas for direct taxes. The proposal under works at CBDT is to give chance to the taxpayers to come forward in the scheme on self-declaration, expanding the ambit of cases covered under appeals at various forums, allowing withdrawal of appeals on payment of full tax, interest and penalty, allowing amnesty or a resolution with a minimum penalty payout of 10% or 20% depending on where the cases are stuck. Similarly, in case of indirect taxes, the proposal is to cover custom duty dispute matters, again based on self-declaration, giving chance to taxpayers to come forward. Here too, the idea is to give immunity from interest and penalty in quantums depending where the matters are stuck and how much of disputed amount the taxpayer is willing to pay. It is understood that over 33,000 custom duty cases are stuck in litigation worth about 40,000 crore rupees. So let's see what finally budget unveils for the industry and taxpayers on the dispute resolution.
Timsy, many thanks for joining us. Let's see if we do see this find its way into the budget. Now, another exclusive tonight. SBI-led lenders are not in favour of granting additional loans to Vodafone Idea until there is clarity on the government's equity conversion as well as the promoter's own equity conversion. The government has already told the telecom company that they will consider converting the licence fee and government dues into equity only after the company infuses more capital into the company. Ritu joins us now with more. Ritu, for Vodafone Idea, it's pretty much a catch-22 at this point in time.
Indeed, a classic catch-22 situation because not enough money to repay the debts, not enough money to invest into the business or grow it to get out of that debt trap, and therefore that is where the situation currently is at. Now, lenders have made it very clear that unless there is promoter equity, promoter skin in the game, they're not comfortable lending any more loans because it already has huge dues, right? There are immediate dues of about 7,000 crores to Indus that Vodafone has to repay, because of which it has been knocking on various lenders' doors. But they've made it very clear, unless there's promoter equity infusion and there is clarity on when government will convert the AGR dues into equity and take up stake into Vodafone, they will not be extending any fresh loans. It is only at that stage, when there's clarity on government's equity conversion and the promoter's equity infusion as well, will there be some confidence among investors. And even after that, lenders are worried that any fresh loans that are granted, if at all they are, will be used to repay existing debt and not to invest into new business. So therefore, it isn't an ideal situation, and lenders are not very comfortable with the idea of extending any fresh loans. And they estimate that the immediate requirement for Vodafone Idea to take care of its financial dues is upwards of 24,000 crores. So it's a steep amount that they're looking at.
Right, Ritu, appreciate you joining us. So uncertainty continues as far as Vodafone Idea is concerned. No movement on the government converting the debt to equity and banks unwilling to lend further. Let's see if the promoters do infuse more capital. A quick check at some of the other headlines tonight. The Bombay High Court has reserved the order on the interim bail application filed by former ICICI Bank CEO Chanda Kochhar and her husband Deepak Kochhar. The verdict will be out on Monday. The Kochhars have challenged their arrest over the alleged irregularities in loans granted to the Videocon group. A day after Amazon announced that they are looking to fire over 18,000 employees globally, sources have told CNBC-TV18 the decision will impact about 1% of the workforce in India. We learned that around 1,000 employees of Amazon India are likely to be impacted. Amazon India responded to CNBC-TV18's query, saying they don't have any additional information at the moment. The Supreme Court has transferred to itself all petitions seeking legal recognition of same-sex marriage. These pleas were pending in the High Courts of Delhi, Kerala and Gujarat. The Apex Court has said that petitioners who cannot travel to Delhi can make submissions and appear for the hearings virtually. The petitions will be heard by the top court on the 13th of March. The Supreme Court has expressed its concerns over the centre's delay in approving the appointment of judges as recommended by the Collegium. The Apex Court has noted that nothing can prevent appointments reiterated by the Collegium and has asked the centre to clarify on the delay. Ashmit joins us now with more details. Ashmit, take us through the Supreme Court's observation. What was the centre's response? And this back and forth clearly continues.
Indeed, and Justice A.K. Kaul making his position quite clear on the matter, that he is not happy with the fact that the centre, in fact, has chosen to send back 22 names back to the SC Collegium for reconsideration. Now, the aspect that he took exception to is that these 22 names which have been sent back include names that have been reiterated not once but twice by the Supreme Court Collegium. Now, that is something that the Supreme Court said is not something that the centre can, in fact, pick and choose on. In fact, the Supreme Court said that the centre, it seems, is trying to pick laws which it can, in fact, work with and which it won't work with, and that is something that is simply not acceptable to the Apex Court. That's only part one of the story. The other half is the Supreme Court also, in fact, took exception to the fact that even in matters of transfer of judges, where the centre has a very limited role in terms of vetting the decisions taken by the Supreme Court Collegium, even their delays are being caused. Now, that, the Supreme Court observed, is merely an administrative issue. The centre has absolutely no role over there, and and that there is no question as to why Centre is taking time beyond the prescribed timelines. And speaking of the timelines, that is one thing that in fact the Apex Court expressed to the Attorney General, that that the Supreme Court hopes for his personal intervention in resolution of the matter so that Centre complies with the prescribed timelines. The matter has now been referred for further hearing to February 3rd.
Ashmit, appreciate you joining us. Up next, the National Disaster Response Force gets dispatched to Uttarakhand's Joshimath after cracks appear nearly 600 residences, impacting 3,000 families. That and more when we return. Well, here's the latest on the Air India urinating passenger incident. The accused male passenger booked for misbehaviour has been sacked by Wells Fargo, where he was working as vice president of the India business. Meanwhile, the DGCA has issued an advisory to all airlines handling unruly passengers. Earlier, Air India CEO Campbell Wilson also wrote to employees on how they should deal with such incidents. Madiha joins us now to take us through all the latest developments. Madiha, the issue, of course, is getting a lot of attention at this point in time. The DGCA now reacting, issuing an advisory to all airlines. Air India issuing an advisory and guidelines to its own employees. And, of course, the Delhi police and its probe continues.
Well, the outrage against this male passenger is totally unprecedented, with action being taken by various departments. The latest one, as you mentioned, is by Wells Fargo, where the accused was working as a vice president of the India business. Wells Fargo issued a statement saying it has terminated the accused, further adding that it holds employees to the highest standard of professional and personal behavior. Earlier, the Delhi Commission for Women also took suo moto cognizance of the matter and issued a notice to the Delhi airport where the Air India flight had landed. The aviation regulator DGCA has also issued an advisory to all scheduled airlines on how they should be handling unruly passengers. Though these rules already exist, the advisory reiterates that the pilot in command of the aircraft is responsible for the safety of passengers, crew, cargo and maintaining flight discipline. It also asks airline representatives to lodge FIR with concerned security agency at aerodrome. The DGC also advises the cabin crew to use restraining devices to handle unruly passengers and inform them of the repercussions and consequences of such unruly behavior. The regulator also states that Director of In-Flight Services must report the unruly passenger incident to DGCA. Air India CEO Campbell Wilson also wrote to employees earlier today on dealing with such passengers. He said incidents of improper behavior on an aircraft must be reported to authorities immediately, even if the matter has been settled between the parties involved.
Madiha, many thanks for joining us. And speaking of Air India, the airline has issued directives to employees on what kind of information they can share with employees of Vistara. Remember, both airlines are part of the Tata Group. Tata Group owns 51% stake in Vistara, with Singapore Airlines owning the remaining 49%. And both the Tatas and Singapore Airlines are currently in talks to merge the airlines, and the deal is expected to be completed by the end of March 2024. So in the interim, the Tatas have asked Air India employees not to share commercially sensitive information with the Vistara team. This includes contract terms, information on pending bids, current and future pricing plans, strategies, profit and cost details. Essentially, Air India staff have been told not to share any information that compromises the independent operation of the two airlines or information that reduces competition between them till the merger is complete. Now, the National Disaster Response Force has been dispatched to Uttarakhand's Joshimath after cracks appeared in nearly 600 residences, impacting 3,000 families. Locals have blamed an NTPC tunnel and other construction projects. Archana Solanki spoke to NTPC officials and joins us now with more on this story. Archana, what exactly is going on? What does NTPC have to say about this? And, you know, the Chief Minister at this point in time has said, halt all activities. What is the impact of what's going on?
Thank you, Shereen. It is an extremely concerning development that's taking place in the Himalayan town of Joshimath in the state of Uttarakhand. Let's get our viewers up to speed with it. Let's start with the latest. Around 570 houses in the highly sensitive Joshimath have developed cracks, and the number is only growing, and the cracks are growing wider by the day. Over 50 families have been moved to night shelters because their homes have become absolutely unlivable and unsafe. As a measure of precaution, a team of NDRF has been deployed. And a while ago, Chief Minister Pushkar Singh Dhami had a high-level meeting with officials to assess the situation. Now, angry locals, it's very important, angry locals have been carrying out torchlight protests and even blocked the Badrinath highway to draw the attention of the authorities. Teams from IIT Roorkee are among experts in town to find answers to what has led to this. Now, this phenomenon, Shereen, is also known as land subsidence. And the locals and scientists have blamed it on aggressive construction and excavation activities in the area. In order to avert any crisis, the government has halted construction activity. This also includes NTPC's 520 megawatt Tapovan Hydel project, and the other one is Char Dham road work. Now, NTPC has claimed that its Hydel project is not responsible for land subsidence as the tunnel does not pass through Joshimath. It also added that its technology does not involve blasting activities. It's only taking place through droning and not blasting activities. It's important to note that experts had forewarned about this, and this was first flagged in the 1976 state government appointed Mishra Commission report that recommended heavy construction be banned in the area around Joshimath. In fact, just last year, a group of scientists had pointed out that Joshimath will sink unless excavation for different development works is stopped immediately. Back to you.
Archana, many thanks for joining us. And this is an important story, and it is a story that we need to focus our attention on because we are likely to see an eventuality like this in light of unsustainable development that doesn't take into consideration the ecological reality of a place, and this will need to be given attention and focus. Now, the Municipal Corporation of Delhi has stalled its mayoral elections till further notice after clashes broke out between the Aam Aadmi Party and BJP councillors earlier today. The Aam Aadmi Party has accused the Delhi LG of nominating members aligned with the BJP. The BJP has said that the Aam Aadmi Party does not have faith in their own councillors. Bihar Chief Minister Nitish Kumar has announced that the state will conduct a caste-based census project from tomorrow. It is expected to be completed by May. The two-phase survey is set to cost the state about 500 crore rupees. The data will be collected digitally through an app. Russian President Putin has ordered a 36-hour ceasefire on the Ukraine front line on the eve of Orthodox Christmas. The order comes after a request from top Orthodox leader Patriarch Kirill, who's a staunch Putin loyalist. Ukrainian President Zelensky has rejected the offer and dismissed it as a ruse to halt Ukraine's military advances.
They now want to use Christmas as a cover, albeit briefly, to stop the advances of our boys in Donbass and bring equipment, ammunitions and mobilized troops closer to our positions. What will that give them? Only yet another increase in their total losses.
3 days on, the U.S. House of Representatives is yet to elect a new speaker as Republican hardliners derailed Kevin McCarthy's bid for the 11th time. The paralysis over the election of the new speaker is the longest in the last 164 years. Well, a new car which changes colours, a car that can fly, a portable electric scooter which folds into a suitcase, and a robot dog which can double up as a pet with different personality traits. Consumer Electronics Show, the most influential tech event in the world, is an ode to the future. Shivani Gharat gets us a sneak peek of all the latest tech at CES.
At the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas, BMW at their keynote unveiled a car that changes colors. Yes, you heard me right. It can actually be called a chameleon, but it is called iVision D. iVision DEE, which stands for Digital Emotional Experience. Now, it is coated with this particular ink called e-ink that can be cycled through 32 different colors. Flying cars have been spoken about at CES for quite some time, but behind me is a prototype of one such flying car by Aska that will make it a reality very soon. It is planning to get an FAA approval very soon. Now, this car has a range of 250 miles on single charge. Yes, it's electric, but it also has a hybrid petrol engine, so you can use both the kinds of fuels to fly the car. I'm currently sitting on an electric scooter that folds into a suitcase. Yes, you heard me right. So if parking is an issue for you, you can take this one to your house and park it in your home because it does fold into a suitcase. Now you need to charge it for 3 hours to ride for 1 hour or approximately 20 miles, and it is quite portable. Now, Wowie is a company at CES that has launched a robo-dog called Dog E. Now, this particular dog has a million different combinations of sound, colors and personality traits because they feel that every dog has its own unique personality, and it is so accurate.
Well, that's the future. And with that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of India Business Hour. Thanks very much for watching. Stay tuned. The news continues here on CNBC-TV18.